Professor Renwick, how are you doing today?
Great, great. Nice to see you. Nice to
Thank
meet
you. Thank you. So I just brought you on to talk a little bit about the Serum Rite. People ask me all the time about the Serum Rite because it's something which is a bit mysterious to people because the Reformation happened and then kind of disappeared. Some of the Tractarians tried to bring back some elements, and people now that the Ordinariate is a thing, I've just been wondering about the future of it. So will you first start off telling us a little bit about the history behind the Serum Rite?
Yes, of course. So, um, England before the Norman conquest was run by the Anglo-Saxons, and they had a tradition of which the sources are not really that many and that wide. It's not as if we can really recreate the entire Anglo-Saxon tradition in any complete form. However, parts of that did make their way into the Sarum Rite as it developed. For example, certain of the saints, Oswald, for example, comes out of that tradition, Dunstan, and so forth. Now, with the Norman conquest, 1066, we have the establishment of a new dynasty, and we have the sort of importation of a new gentry from the Norman lands in northern France, both the political people and the religious people, so that almost all of the bishops were replaced by Norman bishops, of which Osmond, the Bishop of Sarum, was one of the leaders, and he was in fact for a time Chancellor of England, which is equivalent to Prime Minister, if you like. So the intertwining of the political and the religious was very tight. And being that Osmond was in a new land, a new area, and wanting to synthesize the Anglo-Saxon with the Norman, established, edited, revised the books of worship, the breviary and the missal, to be suited to the place where he was. Now, it must be understood that in the Middle Ages, each area, each diocese had its own traditions, its own way of doing things in quite a few areas. The calendar of saints is different in each diocese. Certain detailed local practices would be found in different dioceses. Now, the thing is that Osmond seemed to have been very a diligent editor and a diligent administrator, and because he was connected with the Norman hierarchy, his way of doing things seemed to be the most orderly and systematic and comprehensive way of ordering the liturgy. Questions of who should read what lesson at what time, what psalms should be sung at any office, all the questions of what should we do, how should we do things, what should we do on a leap year, all these things he organized as best he could. And because his organization seemed to be the most clear, it was rapidly adopted by other neighboring dioceses throughout southern England, to the point where most of England was following the Sarum Rite in terms of its worship. Now, when I say most of England, there are exceptions. The Diocese of Hereford, that continued its own traditions, and the Diocese of York continued its own way of doing things. But apart from that, Sarum ruled rather supreme, and in time through most of Scotland and parts of Ireland, and indeed parts of northern France, which was under the control of the Normans. Now, the importance of Sarum comes from the fact that we have a complete set of liturgical materials from that era. If you were to go to, say, Rouen, and see if you could dig up all the medieval materials to reconstruct the Rouen rite or the Rouen use, it's very hard to find adequate materials to cover all the ground. France suffered the depredations of the the Revolution, just as England suffered the depredations of the Reformation. So because Sarum was so widespread, we have quite a few sources available to cover the ground. And as I've been doing my work, there are only tiny little details where I can't seem to find a tiny little piece of music or a bit of text or a bit of rubric that would explain how things ought to be done. So that's, and also it must be remembered that England, the dioceses in England were quite large as compared to France, which had many more dioceses which were quite small. So England developed out of these factors the fact that similar liturgy was being carried on throughout the whole land, those two York and Hereford areas accepted. And so the dominance of Sarum, I would wager that it was perhaps the most widespread use in the later Middle Ages. If we go to Italy, parts of Italy were following some sort of Roman traditions, Franciscan traditions, other parts following Beneventan traditions. There was not the kind of homogeneity in liturgy in the Middle Ages that we find coming out of the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent is the watershed for the Roman Rite, as the Reformation is for other areas.
Yeah, I did notice reading the introduction, I think it's to the 1552 Book of Common Prayer. It talks about the it talks about the rites or the ways of prayer in York and Salisbury. So was there multiple you mentioned a few of these local traditions, but could we speak properly of multiple different rites in England, or was Cranmer kind of waxing eloquent when he's a bit over exaggerating when he talks about these different rites in England?
Well, there were three recognizable, distinguishable rites. Sarum, which occupied 90% of the area, or 80%, let's say. York, perhaps 15% of the area, and Hereford, maybe 5% of the area. There's one other that is mentioned by Cranmer, Bangor, which is a place in Wales. And I believe that that's really, when we speak of Bangor, we're looking at Sarum materials, which perhaps might have reference to a specific saint from the Bangor area or something. But basically, Bangor is the same as Sarum. So there are really three.
How did the Reformation itself affect the Sarum Rite?
Well, it abolished it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so with the effects on, for example, the Book of Common Prayer and saints calendars.
What Cranmer tried to do in the Book of Common Prayer was to condense into a single volume the essence of the medieval Latin Rite, turned into English, combined with the essence of the layman's Book of Hours, which was typically in Latin, but by the mid-16th century was frequently found in English as well. So what is contained, for example, is the traditional epistles and gospels for the days of the year and occasional saints. The collects are, for the most part, rewritten, although sometimes they're recognizable from their antecedents, but many of the collects are rewritten because collects tend to have a kind of a theological focus, and Cranmer was a stickler for a kind of reformed theology that comes out in the collects. The things that were omitted, which are the characteristics of the rite, really are all of the Matins lessons that belong to the Sundays of the year and all the saints, the legends of the saints. What's left out is all the antiphons that pertain to the psalmody throughout the year, whether it's the regular days, the Sundays, the feasts, the saints' days, all of that is gone. The chants of the Requiem Mass, all of the sequences, which are their own tradition, all of the hymns are gone from the tradition, so that we have in the early Anglican days simply singing the Psalms straight up.
Mhm. So how would you respond to, because I hear this sentiment a lot, that Serum isn't really a distinct rite, and that Serum's kind of more of a, scholarly myth than anything. How would you respond to those that say that it was basically just the same as the rest of the Roman rite?
Well, the core of the Western Rite is the same from diocese to diocese. When we take something, say the canon of the Mass, the essence is identical. There may be a tiny little difference, for example, an elevation here or a sign of the cross there, but basically the canon is the same. The epistles and gospels are generally the same, but where things change from diocese to diocese would be the calendar, which sets up what saints are going to be observed and how important they are in any different area. The readings that pertain to the saints, the readings at Matins where those are sourced, because they're not. Some readings are from the Bible, but many readings are from the Fathers, and so the sources of those readings change, so that Sarum would have a lot of readings from Bede, for example, as well as a lot of Gregory and Augustine. Now, it's not as if we have the words rite and use, which are tricky words. I like to say that there's a Western rite, of which there are many uses, essentially one use for each diocese, of which then the Roman would actually be termed a use of the Western Rite, which is not used very widely. The Roman use of the Middle Ages was really restricted very much to the area around Rome. The French uses were more widespread with their Gallican traditions, some of the Gallican traditions, some of the chants and so on that worked their way into the history. So we have to see a kind of wealth of variation in the Middle Ages, as compared to, we have to understand what happened at Trent, where essentially all of the variety, with certain notable exceptions, was condensed into one single use, a new Roman Rite. And when I say condensed, I do mean condensed, because while the Roman Breviary of Trent is about this big, text only, you can't quite see it, there we are, this is not it, but it's about this size. The Sarum Medieval Breviary is 3 times this size. This is one of 3 volumes. So you have to understand what was omitted when the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation came along. What was omitted was most of the saints' lives, many of the lessons from the Fathers, all of the rhymed offices that cropped up in the Middle Ages, such as the beautiful chants for St. Catherine, all of the sequences, bar about 4, were deleted, a rich tradition. And so much was cut out of the Roman Rite at that point. But it became a unified package throughout Western Europe. And this all has to do with the rise of print media. Print media allows multiple production, and so then standardization across the tradition. Before that, it was all done by hand, and so traditions crept up and developed on their own. So in the same way, in England, we have, with the advent of print, that's where the Book of Common Prayer has its power. Again, in England, a single rite, the Book of Common Prayer, throughout the entire realm. And there we have not only the geographical, but the political aspect, where that rite is connected with the monarchy in Britain. So there are many different factors going on, but so what was left over then, besides this new Tridentine Roman Rite, was the Dominicans kept their own traditions, and they still do today to an extent. the Ambrosians, that is the Church of Milan, and one place in Spain, right? The Mozarabic Rite.
So, okay, we're right now at the in our historical overview. We're at the Reformation. There's been the tyranny of the monarchy taking away our beautiful Sarum Rite. So, after this point, what happened in the story of bringing back the Sarum Rite? I'm assuming it's going to start back up near the Tractarian era.
Sure.
That's at least my assumption. So, where do we go from there?
Yeah. Well, there are little things that continued. The Jesuits did produce for England a rite of baptism that was used in that period by the in secret, and the Sarum wedding ceremony was maintained in its structure because that was a legal binding contractual event as well as a religious event. Yeah, so when did things start picking up? Yeah, so we have in the 19th century the Tractarians, as you mentioned, and the real issues around the connection of church and state, and the concept of them wanting to be separate. And we have that's where Newman really comes in, isn't it? Separating the church from the state. We have the reintegration of the Roman, the closing of that prohibition of Roman worship in England and the beginning of Roman Catholic churches, and that scholarly tradition of starting to look at these manuscripts and starting to piece together the past. There's a 19th century interest, a romantic interest in the medieval era, which comes out, as you know, not only in music but in architecture, in dress, in ornament, in the new Roman Catholic churches being built in the medieval style of the Gothic. So all of those, the values are connected with that. And so we start having editions being created of the worship materials. Yeah. And at the same time, then the starting to look into the chant, just as at Salem's in France, the Roman Catholics are starting to look again into their chant roots and trying to get back to some of that. Not only the restoration of the chant, but we have, in some circles at least, the restoration of the original forms of the hymn texts that were altered, sort of purified, you might say, I believe in the 17th century.
Yeah, I didn't know this, but I was reading, I think it was an encyclical from Pope Pius X. And when Pope Pius X was writing this encyclical about sacred music, he just happenstancely mentions, just kind of a side comment, like, oh yeah, we have just started to recover Gregorian chant.
That's right.
And this had really surprised me because I had not known that it wasn't really until the late 19th century that some of this stuff, even in the Roman Rite, started to come back to prominence.
That's
and that
right.
it had basically been lost everywhere. Everyone had these losses since
Correct.
the era of the Reformation.
Correct.
So, okay, now we're at the Tractarians. They started to bring back stuff. So what is, I guess I'll let you do a little bit of autobiographical stuff. What have you done to aid in the recovery of Serum?
Yeah, thank you for that. So it was about 15, more than 15 years ago, closer to 20 years ago, that there was a certain coming together of items that allowed me the possibility of some recreation. And that was, I had come across these volumes, which is the Proctor Sarum Breviary. This is a 19th century edition. But I also got my hands on the music that goes with it, which looks like that. And computer programming had come to a point where there was a useful program I could use to set the text and the music together so as to try to bring it to life. And I'm rather keen on the idea of a free and open internet. I guess it's my age. And so I created the site and started putting up documents of the Sarum Rite. And my object then was to try to get in one place all of the content of the Sarum Rite as accurate as possible and in its original Latin form and its Newman's form. That's the main object, is to have the materials at hand for anybody who wants to know what it is, what it actually is. How you use it, that's another question. From there, I have moved in, because of interest, to the translation into English, which I think serves two purposes. One, we already see in the 16th century the idea of moving liturgy into the vernacular, whether it's in the translation of the books of hours that people were using. And of course, the Book of Common Prayer itself is largely a translation from the Latin text. So it seemed to me a natural progress, and one possible outcome that might have happened if the violence of the 16th century Reformation in England hadn't occurred, and if it was more of a gradual development, that perhaps the liturgy would have come into English. And so, and then of course there have been many editions of bits and bobs of it. For example, the very nice Palmer editions of the Sarum Order of Vespers, for example. They're nice. But they're not, they're edited to be more in keeping with an Anglican tradition. They don't have all the saints, for example. There are things missing. And my object is to have everything from the original so we can understand it. And then the next stage was, because of the people were asking, I started creating my own books of Sarum chants. So this is this is Compline for the entire year in one book, small book, in English, using the English that pertains to the Roman Catholic tradition. So the Douay Rheims Bible texts, for example, and Psalter and so on. And the same thing in a Book of Common Prayer texts. So you can use whichever, because I think these are both valid traditions, valid developments and continuations of where things would have been. And so some people use them. Yeah. And then of course I got into bigger things like this. And you'd be surprised at the amount. I believe that my entire breviary in Latin will be equivalent to about 15 volumes this size, which is huge. It makes the Liber Usualis look like a baby, for example. You know, that's the size and the amount of content in the medieval rites. It's unbelievable.
Man, I thought my sumo was big, but
Yeah.
with these medieval breviaries, they're massive. So,
They're massive.
and then so you've done work on the breviary exclusively. Have you done any work on the missal?
Oh yes. The entire Latin missal is available for anyone online, and at the same time, I've also these books are the gradual, so the singing part of the missal. So for choirs that want to sing in Latin, the entire gradual is available in book form, and hopefully the English versions of that gradual will be coming along in time, so that you can perform. We use these on Sunday at my church. This gradual, for example. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just
And even the
grabbing
gradual, look at the size of it. This is all of the chants of the Mass. It's pretty big.
just grabbing the link for everybody real quick. People
Yeah.
are asking in the chat. Put that in for them. Okay, so another thing people have been asking about is how exactly do these in particulars how does the Sarum Breviary and Missal, how does it differ from the general Tridentine, or I guess most people are familiar with the 62? That'd be a whole can of worms, though. Let's just go Tridentine Rite, Breviary and Missal.
So in terms of the breviary, the Tridentine Breviary is essentially the Franciscan medieval tradition. But as I said before, part parts have been cut out. A lot. It's been simplified already, so that the breviary, is about half the size. The Roman Tridentine Breviary is about half the size of a medieval breviary in terms of its content. Most of the readings that are non-biblical have been removed, for example, so that the Tridentine Breviary is much more biblically based, and it has much less of the medieval legend stories of the saints, for example, where a saint in the medieval times might have 9 lessons devoted to that saint. In the Tridentine Breviary, the same saint might have 3 lessons devoted to the saint, 3 lessons from a Bible passage, and 3 lessons from a church father. So that the emphasis is quite different. For example, now in the Missal, the essence of the Missal is not so different from the medieval times to the modern times. And likewise, the Missal in terms of dioceses and rites is not so different from one to the other. There's much more continuity in the Missal. So what we have really omitted in the 1962 and in the Tridentine Missals is the sequences are all gone. The number of saints or the list of saints is quite different. But the chants, the offertories and graduals and so on, tracts and so on are pretty similar, so they can be used.
So what differs in Serum chant? Because I've used in the past, and this is how I learned to chant personally. I use St. Dunstan's Psalter.
Yes.
So and that mentioned that the psalm tones and the chant tones in the Serum chant is actually different than general Western Roman chant. So how does Serum chant differ from the rest of the rite?
Sure. So I think if we look at psalms themselves and psalm tones, we have to understand that our standard today is really what was created in the 19th century in Salems. The psalm tones that were chosen by Salems to keep in their books from the wide variety of psalm tones available throughout Europe. And so what we have, if we look at Sarum psalm tones, is certain variations from what you would be familiar with. For example, tone 1, Salems begins, da, 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 da. That's the opening. The Sarum and most other traditions actually go da 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 da. It's a little simpler, for example. And there are such changes, sometimes more ornate, sometimes simpler, throughout all of the different tones. So it's not a matter of right and wrong. It's a matter of variation from place to place. And I think of it somewhat in terms of modern days where you have cover songs. Someone will do the sort of authentic version and other people will pick up the same song and do it a slightly different way. And sometimes the melody is even a little different. If we think of that beautiful old folk tune, pom 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 pom, there with the raised sixth, but pom 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 tom tom tom. It's actually a different note at the top. A major second in the first version and a minor second in the second. And no one knows really which is the right version. They both sound pretty good, and different people would do it different ways. So I think there's a misconception arising out of the Tridentine reforms, which was that, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And that the Tridentine books, or the 1962 Missal, that's the right way, or the Salems Liber Usualis, that's the right way, or so on. But even in Salems, we got now revised versions of the Antiphonal. We've got revised versions of everything's going under revision. And that's kind of the way things are. It's a bit messier than in reality than what we try to do.
So where do you in the future, since all this work has been done over the last century and a half, where do you see the Sarum Rite really flourishing in the future? Do you see it? There's there's a few options that you could. The Western Orthodox Rite, you could see it in the Ordinariate Chair of St. Peter. You could see it in the in Anglicanism in the various continuum bodies. Where do you see Sarum really taking hold?
Yeah. I guess I see a kind of a shift from the sort of monolithic form of church we're coming out of, whether it is St. Pius X's vision of church or Vatican II's vision of church, the idea that everybody's doing the same thing the same way at the same time, and that gives unity. That concept, and we have that in the Anglican Church as well, in the Book of Common Prayer. That's the way, that's the only way, that's it. And I think I've detected over the last decades more and more moving away into different possibilities. Some of them I think are good and some of them I think are lousy, but be that as it may, I think a move to explore different ways and different things. So, is it wrong for some church to observe a certain saint's day and another church not to observe the same saint's day, or have that saint's day on another day? Where are the limitations? And I think in the Roman Catholic Church, the true limitation is in the canon of the Mass, where it really belongs, at least in the traditional way, the traditional canon of the Mass. That is the ground, that is the fundamental. But whether one were to sing the proper chants of the day to the tunes in their version that you find in Solemn's books, or the tunes you find in Dominican books, or the tunes you find in Sarum books or York books, I mean, is it really going to hurt? It's just the same way as you might sing a hymn to a different tune in a different place. It's not really breaking any religious rules, honestly, to use a different tune or a different version of a tune. It really isn't. So, where I would like to see is bringing back more of the variety, bringing back the sequences, whether they're Sarum sequences or any other kind of sequences, bringing back more of the saints' days, bringing back more of the saints' lives. I mean, people coming from a rational age think there's something wrong with the idea of St. Margaret being eaten by a dragon. But we have to think symbolically. We have to think about the meaning of the stories, not the stories themselves. We have to think about what it's telling us. And then there's a richness of imagination, a richness of storytelling, which is there for the taking, to enhance our spiritual lives.
Okay, I see a few questions in the chat real quick.
I've said the wrong thing now.
Okay, so was Serum done in Scotland, or was there a Celtic rite that was done there?
Sure. So throughout the Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, so we're talking from the 13th century onwards, it was mostly Sarum in Scotland. We actually have the so-called Aberdeen Breviary, which was created in the early late 15th century, which is a Sarum breviary, but it has the addition of all sorts of interesting Scottish saints to the calendar, with lessons and stories about them. And so that's a great wealth of tradition there. But it is basically the Sarum Rite in terms of all of the rules of how things are done, the antiphons and so on. Yeah,
that is kind of something I long for, to have more saint readings.
Absolutely.
I know I'd love to have in my liturgical books, which is basically just the Book of Common Prayer, but stamped by Rome. That's basically what we have, with the minor hours added. I wish there was those nice, robust hagiographical, or is it hagiographical? I don't know. Text to read about St. Margaret getting eaten by a dragon or something like that.
So I have, at this point, I do have a draft of the entire Sanctorale in English. It's not ready for public consumption yet, but I've really enjoyed and worked hard at that. It's fascinating.
There you go. I can't wait for it to come out. I think I'm gonna
Well,
pick myself up a copy of Compline.
the first 3 months will be available online in July. So December, January, and February will be up in July.
Oh, there you go, everybody. I'll make sure I'll link to that when it comes out.
And everything goes online first, right? I mean, I'd love you for you to buy my books and use them, but everything in the books is online somewhere, although it's not as convenient often because the online is somewhat a work in progress.
Okay, so somebody else asked, are there any distinctives, things that differ in the Serum ordination rite that differ from the Roman one? I didn't ask about the Pontifical. That's right.
Yeah.
So what differs in the Pontifical?
Now you're really stretching me. The Pontifical is an area because Pontificals were really only used by bishops. There aren't that many of them, and furthermore, because of the lack of a need of a large number, there was never a printed Sarum Pontifical to establish a kind of final standard. So we have to rely on manuscripts, which to determine, which is really a totally authentic Sarum Pontifical. That's a tricky thing. You see, what bishops did as bishops didn't necessarily follow according to any given use or rite. They were more, this is a bishop's book. This is what bishops do. This is how they do it. Handed on from manuscript to manuscript. And a bishop would take a manuscript perhaps when he was bishop at some cathedral and be appointed to another cathedral and maybe take it with him and use it there in a different use. I mean, so the Pontifical is a tricky area, and so I can't really answer the question about whether or what ordination. I can't answer the question what ordination was like in the use of Sarum. Sorry about that. That's a great question, and I hope to be able to pursue that.
Yeah, I'm assuming that with the breviaries we have the most copies of them because they would have been absolutely everywhere. You only really need one missal per church.
Well, if you think Sarum, the Cathedral of Sarum, Salisbury, would be doing probably 20 or 30 masses a day with all the side chapels, right? You got to imagine what was going on in a place like that. It was like a supermarket, chapels all over the place, people coming and going at all hours with their masses and whatnot.
I think Cranmer would write about how people would run from side chapel to try to get to as many masses as they could.
Yeah,
so
that's right. Yeah, so they want that blessing, They want to be close to God.
There's nothing wrong with that. So do you have anything you'd like to say? I already put the link to your website in the chat, so I'll make sure I get all the information to everybody. Anything you'd like to conclude or plug yourself?
I'd like to encourage people to explore the website. There's a lot on there, but you have to be a bit diligent going from page to page through these drop-down menus to get where you really want to go. Check out the timeline. Check out the what's new, which shows what's coming up. Check out the quick links to some of the more interesting aspects. And do write to me, if you have questions or ideas or concerns, because I do respond. I started publishing these books because people were asking for them, and so don't be shy. Whatever.
Okay. And then real quick, somebody else. In the Sarum Rite, do they hold a candle next to the host during the elevation of the host?
I'm not aware of that. Nope. But if you under links, you will find a couple of videos that show full Sarum masses with video and audio, and you can watch the entire video and see what's going on. Some are instructional, some are just videos that record an event. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And for everybody else, I'll be back on at, what time is it? I'll be back on at 7 p.m. to talk about theological notes in the manualist tradition. Thanks. So I will see everybody in 20 minutes. And thank you, Professor Renwick, for coming on and telling us about the Sarum Rite. I know everybody enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Pleasure. Good night.
And everybody else, it's Lent, so do penance, for the kingdom of God is at hand.
Glory be to